2009 Wharton India Economic Forum, titled India, The Road Ahead, took place in Philadelphia and brought together CEOs of leading Indian companies, investors, heads of non-profit organizations, sports celebrities, and Bollywood stars to discuss where India is headed in an age of economic uncertainty. Indian Knowledge at Wharton brings you one-on-one conversations with these leaders.
David, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I believe that you worked for the U.S. State Department for 34 years.
That's right.
Before you joined the Tata Group. Could you tell us a little bit about your career in government and how your joining the Tata Group came about?
Well, I was 34 years in the government. I spent 34 years in the Foreign Service. And I was fortunate. I think I can look back on my career and say that I was very fortunate that I went to India in my very first assignment. I had never thought about going to India. I had never thought about India at all while I was growing up. But when I joined the Foreign Service, there was an opportunity of going to New Delhi. And so I went there in 1971. I spent 5 years in India at that time and really sort of became enthralled with the place, became very fond of India, and really thought that this might be a place I'd like to make my career. But the reality of the Foreign Service sort of entered, and after those 5 years that I spent in India in the 1970s, I went off to the Middle East, spent over 20 years in the Middle East, but then had the opportunity of coming back to India in 1999 when I became Consul General in Mumbai, and spent 3 years in Mumbai. And during those 3 years, it also coincided with the time that India really began developing as a major economic power and really began developing its IT sector. And because of that, its relationship with the United States became a much stronger one also. And at the same time, the political relations began to develop, began to get better between the United States and India. So after finishing my 3 years in Mumbai, I went back to Washington and became director of the India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka office at the State Department, where I was able to sort of watch the development of the political relationship from even closer quarters in Washington. Then I retired from the government in 2004, and at that time I could see that U.S.-India relations were really a sort of growing concern, and there were going to be a lot of opportunities perhaps in the private sector outside of government. So I was looking in the private sector for some kind of a post-government career, and always thought that I would probably end up working with an American company that was doing work in India, but it just was coincidental that at the same time Ratan Tata, the chairman of Tatas, had decided that he wanted to open up an office in Washington. And someone got us together, and I met people from Tatas, and one thing led to another, and then in early 2005 I joined the Tatas as the North American representative.
Now, I understand that Ratan Tata described your role as being the ambassador for the Tatas in the United States. So what exactly does an ambassador for the Tatas do in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think coming from a diplomatic background, I found a lot of similarity between what I was being asked to do for Tatas and what I used to do for the American government. It's true that Ratan Tata did tell me at the time that I met him before taking the position, and that he envisioned my role as being that of an ambassador for the Tatas. And I think what he meant by that, and the way that it's actually turned out, is that I represent the views of the Tatas, the objectives and goals of the Tatas in the United States. I interact with government officials, with regulators, with legislators, with people from the executive branch on some issues of concern, of interest to the Tatas. And I also report back to Tata headquarters, to Bombay, about what I find, what I hear in Washington, what the trends are, what people are thinking about India, what people are thinking about Indian business. Try to sort of be an interlocutor, if you will, between the Tatas in India and the United States government in particular, but also with the population and with America sort of writ large, meaning with academia, with American business, with American think tanks, and to sort of explain one another to the other.
So what you referred to the objectives. What are the strategic objectives that the Tatas have for the U.S.?
Well, I think the Tatas want to grow in the United States as a good corporate citizen of the United States. I think one thing that you can say very clearly about the Tatas is that we would like to be known as a global company, and we are a global company. We're very proud of our Indian heritage. We're very proud of the fact that our roots are in India, and they always will be in India, and India will always be the primary sort of source of our strength and the primary source of our growth. But at the same time, we do we do wish to grow, and we wish to grow internationally. And that means that we want to grow according to global standards. So we want to be known as a global company also that happens to be rooted in India. So in the United States, we want to grow as a company. We want to be able to grow our revenues there for the benefit of the shareholders. But at the same time, we also want to be known as good corporate citizens, because as you know, in India, the Tatas are really the gold standards for giving back to the community. And we want to be known that way in the United States also. And in fact, in any country where we operate, that we are a global company rooted in India, but still very sort of concerned about our role in the community and wishing to make a contribution to that community.
Certainly in the past couple of years, the Tatas have pursued quite a few growth opportunities, for example, in the hospitality business in the US, also in the automotive business. Where do you see growth opportunities for the Tatas today, and have these opportunities changed because of the global financial crisis?
Oh, the opportunities are, I think, are still there, but I think that they're on hold right now. I like to think of ourselves as not as a car that's come to a complete halt, but rather one that's sort of in an idle stage right now, because the whole the situation of the global economy has meant that I think everybody's more interested in consolidation right now than in immediate growth. I think that we still see growth opportunities, but we're at this particular point, I think we're kind of looking at those perhaps a year or so from now, once the economy begins coming out of the situation in which it finds itself now. Where are the opportunities? I think where they always were. You mentioned hospitality. We already have 3 hotels in the United States, the Pierre Hotel in New York, the former Ritz-Carlton, now called the Taj Boston in Boston, and we have a hotel in San Francisco called the Campton Place. We're looking at the possibility of acquiring hotels in other major gateway cities in the United States. We also have obviously opportunities in places that you may be surprised. We now have 2 Tanishq jewelry stores in the United States, one outside of New York and New Jersey, one outside of Chicago, just outside of Chicago in Illinois. We see that as a possible growth story right there, and hope to be able to open up more stores. We have soda ash mines in Wyoming. And we are, Tata Chemicals is now the 2nd largest soda ash producer in the world, and we see that as a growth story in the United States too. And beverages, you know, we have, as I'm sure that you know, we own Tetley Tea, the very iconic British tea brand, but we also own, and a lot of Americans don't know this, 8 O'Clock Coffee, which is one of America's oldest coffee brands, as well as a herbal tea company from California called Good Earth Tea. And so we see beverages as another area in which we want to expand. Tata Motors, the automotive sector, I think, will definitely have opportunity for expansion, but I think right now the automotive sector is really sort of in the doldrums right now. I think we're going to have to wait until that begins to come out of its current, rather difficult situation. But yes, I think we see the United States as a place for Tata Motors to expand at some time in the future. We have a presence here now through Jaguar Land Rover.
That's right.
But we're not selling any other kind of vehicles. We do sell some auto parts in the United States.
Do you think you might ever sell the Nano in the US?
I think it could be possible. I think, as you probably know, we've just announced a design for a Nano in Europe, meeting European standards. And I think it's quite possible and quite likely that sometime in the future, I can't tell you exactly when, because it's not on the drawing boards right now. But I think it's sometime in the future. I think that certainly some form of the Nano designed for the American roads and for the American consumer is a very distinct possibility.
Now, as you pursue these opportunities that you just described, what are some of the principal obstacles that the Tatas have faced, and how have you overcome them?
Well, I think that in coming to the United States is a very complex market. It is one that can be unforgiving in some ways. So I think that we want to be very careful how we present ourselves in the United States. If you get off on the wrong foot, if you sort of develop a reputation for delivering a product that's not quite right for the American market, it can take you a long time to come back again and to sort of build up your reputation. So I think we want to build up our presence in the United States in those areas in which we have a lot of capabilities and a lot of experience, like hospitality, like software. We have a very large software presence in the beverage area, in engineering. These are all areas in which we have a lot of experience in India and other countries, and so this is where we started in the United States.
Well, speaking of software, recently there's been a few reports that financial institutions that have accepted Tarp funding may face some restrictions in hiring foreign workers. Do you see this affecting the Tatas or other Indian companies, and are you doing anything with Congress to try and address this?
Well, I mean, this is, of course, the United States is trying very hard to come out of this recession that they're in. And it's understandable that they would want, that Congress and the administration would want to do things that are going to be helpful to American businesses. The TARP funds that are being given to financial institutions do have a provision that institutions that receive TARP funds cannot directly hire H-1B visa holders except under certain kind of conditions. We don't think that the regulations, the way that they're written right now, are going to affect us very much. They're very narrowly written in the sense that they only affect those institutions that are receiving TARP funds, which of course we are not. But nonetheless, there is a direction here that does concern us a little bit. If there are additional restrictions put on H-1B visas or L-1 visa holders, that's something that could create some difficulty for us in the future. So yes, we are talking to members of Congress, and we're talking to our American business partners also, because I think one thing that we want to make clear to people in the United States is that that H-1B visa holders are not the problem with American unemployment. I think there are a number of stories that show that outsourcing, the kind of profits and increased productivity that comes from outsourcing certain kinds of functions to India and to other countries creates more wealth back in the United States than it actually loses, and that wealth then creates more jobs. And so we want to make sure that people understand the full picture of what H-1B visas and L-1 visas really mean, and what outsourcing really means, and how there's also a large amount of insourcing to the United States from Indian companies. In fact, there's a very important point I'd like to make very, very quickly, and that is that the traditional business model that Americans are familiar with of Indian companies, IT companies coming in and sort of taking contracts and jobs and taking them back to India is really changing quite a bit. It hasn't disappeared, but what you have now is a new model whereby a number of Indian companies like Tatas are actually coming into the United States and investing in the United States, creating jobs in the United States. And I can give you a number of different examples of that, including call centers that we run and other Indian companies run, where hundreds of Americans are answering telephones, not in Bangalore, not in Delhi, but in places like Pensacola, Florida, and in Ohio in the middle of Appalachia.
I wonder if you could end with just one final personal question. How do you define success?
Well, I think success is a couple of different things, I think. First of all, laying out a set of objectives, having a clear plan to reach those objectives, and actually achieving those objectives is obviously a success. But I think you have to think also about how those objectives are going to be affecting the people around you. It's something very important for Tatas, and this is something that I've learned from the 4 years that I've been working with Tatas, and you find this absolutely through all levels of people working for Tatas, and that is that there's success is only real success if you can bring a better life to the people around you. Jamshedji Tata, who founded the Tatas, made it quite clear that there's no valid reason to accumulate wealth unless you can take that wealth and return it to the people from whom you made that wealth. And that's the value by which the Tatas have been operating over these last 130 years. And I think that is the clearest measure of success for them. Tata executives, well, from the top to the bottom, will ask themselves, has what I've done, has what I've accomplished in the business sector actually improve the life of the people around me. And that, I think, is our definition of success within Tatas.
David, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Good to be here.